So it's in the Torah. It's there. Maybe people aren't as aware about it, but it's there.
It's just, it seems to be brushed over. It seems to be deliberately ignored when people
Right.
talk about Abraham and Sarah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it just doesn't appear to be an important aspect in the context of the story. But I don't think there's any reason to ignore it. There's nothing wrong with that. You're allowed to marry your niece. So I don't think that's. I can't think of any reason for that. Okay, ladies and gents, all questions welcome anytime. Today, we will continue the theme that we started discussing yesterday. Yesterday, we talked about hospitality. Well, today, I want to continue on that theme. And we'll talk about the guest that Avraham Avinu hosted and some lessons we can learn about our eating habits. Because after all, they say you are what you eat. And the way we eat, I think, says a lot about us. So let's talk about angels and food, how to eat like an angel. So let's just look in the Parsha. Where's my Chumash? Here it is. Our Parsha, Vayera, we read about Avraham and Sarah Imenu's great hospitality. Excuse my voice today. Sorry. And we discussed this very much yesterday and in last week's Parsha when Avraham was 99 years old and God commanded him to undergo a bris milah, a circumcision. Imagine performing a surgery like that in old age. I've heard of people who've done it. Not just bris, but people have done, I think there was a doctor who performed some kind of a appendix removal on his own. Sometimes people do these surgeries. But here Avram is doing this surgery all by himself, to himself. And the Torah describes it's 3 days later, and he's in immense pain. Despite his suffering, our Parsha opens up with Avraham sitting at the entrance of his tent, as we described it yesterday, Kechom Hayom, in the blazing heat. What's he doing there? He's looking out for visitors. Any passers-by, who's coming along. And we read the verses inside. I won't read them all right now. We read it yesterday. But it's the very beginning of Parshas Vayera, our Parsha this week. But I will choose a few verses just now to analyze and discuss. So let's get an understanding, let's get a grip on what's going on here. Avraham is looking for guests. And you'll notice he gets 3 visitors. We discussed yesterday how he puts God on hold to welcome his guest. He says, God, wait, I have visitors coming. There's a few interesting points in the story I want to highlight. First of all, why was God visiting Avraham? What's going on? Why is God there? For what reason? And of course we know that it's called Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. It's an important mitzvah. It's something we should all be doing. Okay? Secondly, why was Avraham at the opening of the tent? We understand he was looking for guests. Why was it so hot? The Medrash tells us the heat. God wanted to avoid any visitors from coming. And perhaps this was part of the test of Avraham. Will he still be out there looking for guests on such a hot day? Because obviously we know these weren't ordinary guests. These were angels. And the angels are coming along on a divine mission. So we look at Rashi. I'm going to look at Rashi here to the very first verse of this week's portion, Vayera Elav, that God appeared to Hashem, says Rashi, Levaker Esachola, to visit the sick. It's a mitzvah. It's an opportunity we have. We can discuss that a little bit. When you're visiting someone who isn't well, what is the protocol? Even though that wasn't the intention of my class today, I just remember Chief Rabbi Harris of blessed memory, 20 years ago, was it 19 years ago, I was studying at the yeshiva in Pretoria, and Rabbi Harris came to visit, and he gave us a talk, and he told us when he visits a sick person, You go into a sick person and say, how you doing today? Gee, I'm sick and lying in the hospital. I have no voice. What do you expect me to say? So he always asks, are you feeling better today? When you visit a sick person and you're sensitive and caring, you uplift, you remove some of the sickness from them. In fact, the sages say it's a 60th of healing. So visiting the sick certainly has that benefit, uplifts a person, and it's definitely worthwhile. But of course, as we said yesterday, as a guest, we always have to be considerate of our hosts. And as visiting the sick, not to become a burden. There are many halachas about it. To sit on eye level with them so they don't strain their eyes and to keep it easy conversation. I'm reminded of a story. It's written in the book by Rabbi Joseph Telushkin. His father was a bookkeeper. He was an accountant for Lubavitch World Headquarters. That means he was the Rebbe's accountant. And once he was very sick in a hospital, and Rabbi Telushkin relates that he gets a phone call from one of the Rebbe's assistants, one of the secretaries. The Rebbe has an accounting question for your father. Rabbi Telushkin says, the Rebbe surely knows my father isn't well, he's in a hospital. So yeah, but the Rebbe asked that we should convey this question to your father on something to do with the accounts. Well, Rabbi Telushkin brought the question to his father and relates in his book, cannot believe the brilliance behind the Rebbe's purpose of asking that question. It wasn't a very complicated matter. It was something quite simple. But it brought life to his father. So there's a lot of different laws, halachas, and common sense ideas on visiting the sick that we can learn from here. See, God visits the third day. Why the third day? Because our sages tell us that after a surgery, after a circumcision, for the first 3 days, the patient needs to recover. The patient isn't doing very well. They're in immense pain. So sometimes wait 3 days for the patient to be doing a little bit better. Why was he at the entrance of the tent? Says Rashi, of course, he was looking for visitors. And then, when the day was very hot, says Rashi, very interesting words. He says as follows, that Hoitzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Chama min Artika, that God Almighty took the sun out of its shield, so to say, that it was such blazing heat. It was so hot, so not to trouble him with wayfarers, that Abraham could relax, Abraham could recuperate. But what do we see? He's out there looking for guests. So Rashi clarifies the idea. Avraham was recovering from his circumcision. God cared for his welfare, and God was visiting him. And to spare him any troubles, knowing that Avraham is this hospitable person along with his wife Sarah, God makes it so hot so Avraham can relax. But no. Avraham is still looking for who's coming by, for visitors. And of course, God sent 3 angels in the guise of people to give Avraham the opportunity of hospitality. And of course, to notify him the good news to come, which would be the news of the birth of their child. Each of the angels had a mission, which we'll get to in a moment. The commentaries to Torah, many commentaries on the Torah, and they raise a question. Let me go back a few verses. It says here that Avraham, he tends to his guest. And what does he do? Vayika chema v'chalav. Avraham, how does he entertain his visitors? The verse says he took curds and milk, uverabaka she'asa, and a calf that he had prepared, vayite lifnehem, and he set these before them. This is what he gives his visitors. And then, he waited for them under the tree as they ate. let the visitors be, give them their space. Going back to yesterday's discussion about being a good host. So what does the Torah say here? The angels ate? Aren't the angels spiritual beings? No need for physical nourishment? No temptation for gastronomic delights? Why does the Torah describe that Avram is entertaining all this food while they eat? I mean, what do we mean when we say that the angels were disguised as men? Did they really eat? If they really ate, that means they took on the full characteristics of humans. Or did they not eat? Which means they still were camouflaged. They were angels just disguised as men. So of course Rashi quotes this as well and tells us that, just a second, I'm looking at Rashi, Niru kamay shachlu, they appeared to be eating. And Rashi quotes this phrase, Mekan shelo yishana adam min haminhag, that a person should not change. You should follow the customs. What's the famous expression we say? When in Rome, do as the Romans, right? So the Medrash is telling us exactly that. Rashi's quoting it. He says they weren't really eating or drinking. They were pretending to be eating and drinking. But what's fascinating is this verse is quoted much later on. The story when Moshe Rabbeinu went on high. And what does Moshe say then? He says, I was there on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Lechem le'achalti, I didn't eat any bread. Mayim le'shasisi, I didn't drink any beverages, no water. But down here in this world, we do eat and drink. So, did they or didn't they eat? Well, Rashi quotes the Medrash saying, they pretended to eat. Interesting. How do you understand this? So, did they, when you're a kid, you have that napkin trick? You want to pretend, you don't want your mother to get you into trouble for not eating the food, but you really don't like it. What did you do? I know what I did. Won't confess it in public. So did they have a little serviette? Or did they do something else? Did they literally consume it? Or did they just pretend? So the Medrash is telling us here that obviously Rashi tells us you follow the local custom. And we see this, Moshe, he goes on high, he doesn't eat or drink. And the example in our parsha where the angels did eat and drink, or pretended to eat and drink. So regarding this, the Medrash actually expresses surprise that the angels would eat or drink. That's why it says they pretended, they appeared to be eating. Obviously, they're following the local custom. They're not making a major show, but they're not really eating because angels don't eat or drink. Now, there's a little bit more to this. It's discussed in the Gemara. The Talmud tells us that a person should never deviate from local custom, and uses these examples of Moshe and Hai and the guests, the angels in our parsha. So we see that, yes, they're pretending to eat. It's interesting. I did see another commentary, Tosfos in the Gemara. Tosfos says something else. He says that they actually did eat and drink in Avram's honor. That's what he says. So that's a different opinion and perspective. Again, it's demonstrating not to change from the local custom, right? But either way, either Tosfos is saying do as the Romans do in Rome, follow the local custom. Local custom on earth is to eat, so the angels ate. Or, as the Medrash and the Gemara seems to say, is they pretended to eat. I saw another opinion somewhere else. It says that they consumed the food to ash, or that it wasn't literally eating. Whatever the case was, we wonder here, what does this all matter for? What's this about? Why do we have to discuss this at such great length? Whether they sat down to eat literally or figuratively, what's the difference? Does it really make a difference to us? Is it going to make, what relevance is this? Why is this important? What difference does it make to us if the angels ate or did not eat? Why is there such a discussion in the Talmud? Does it really matter if they ate or pretended to eat? That we need to have such discussion about it. So the truth is, my friends, that if it's a discussion in the Talmud, whether they pretended to eat or whether they ate literally, there is reason for this. The Talmud is not just engaging in some kind of useless, purposeless discussion. So does it matter? Of course it matters if the Talmud discusses this. And one primary example is a discussion, perhaps I even mentioned it in a shir, around the time of Shavuos, where we discuss Moshe Rabbeinu goes on high to get the Torah, and there discusses that what happens when Moshe went on high to heaven. And there's a verse that says, Moshe Allah Elokim, Moshe went up on high to Mount Sinai. So the Talmud asks, what did he go up for? What's the meaning that he ascended? Allah. Talmud discusses this and says that he contested, he fought with the heavenly angels. Why? It says the Medrash that when Moshe went on high, the angels asked God, Ma yilod ish beneinu? What's this Homo sapien human being doing amongst us? So God tells Moshe, or maybe God responds to the angels and says, well, he's coming to get the Torah. The angels protested. They said, Chemda genuza, such a hidden treasure, the Torah, it should stay here on high. The human beings, they don't deserve it. It shouldn't go down to them. So the angels are trying to confront Moshe to prevent him from leaving heaven with the Torah. And when they try to stop him, God intervenes and tells, I don't have the text in front of me, but he tells Moshe to respond. You're a good Jewish lawyer. And he says, you know how to answer them. And Moshe starts debating with the angels. What did they do when they came to visit Abraham's tent? And the Medrash concludes that the Torah was given in Abraham's merit. Credit to the memory of the angels eating with him in that tent. And the truth is, there's a lot of discussion there. I don't know which direction to go. But what's going on here? What is the deeper meaning of all this? For what reason? Yes, we could dissect and try to understand, is this some kind of supernal soap opera of Moshe's debate with the angels? And does it really make a difference to us if they ate or they pretended to eat? What's this about? But if this is a discussion in the Gemara, there's obviously a lesson, a message. When the angels are trying to prevent Moshe from leaving heaven with the Torah, they obviously have a good motive. They're saying, what? You human beings, you fail, you make mistakes, you are going to transgress and violate the laws of this Torah? And Moshe's response is it only us or you too? Well, let me ask you, what does it say in the Ten Commandments? Don't steal. Do angels have a free will to steal? So, to try to understand this and to understand the significance of this discussion, the Moshe protests to the angels. He says, the fact that you ate with Abraham, according to the verse that we read in our Parsha, the very beginning this week, that is proof that refutes your argument that the Torah should stay in heaven. So let's try to understand what is the meaning, what is the significance to this debate, to this discussion, what's it all about, and we'll go in a very interesting direction. Let's start with the Jews traveling in the desert, okay? And what happens is they need to eat. What does God provide them? How did they eat? What food did they have for those 40 years? We know that God provided the miraculous manna from heaven. Now, when we compare and contrast manna with regular food, we understand that there are certain advantages in each of them. So let's begin by seeing the Torah's description of manna. In the Torah, much later on, we read about it in the book of Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy, in Shmos and Devarim. Moshe then in Devarim, what's Deuteronomy? It's a repeat. He's rehashing the entire journey through the desert to the people. And at one point, he reminds the people of how they complained about the manna. And before explaining the purpose of this heavenly food, what does Moshe say? He says, Vayancha, Vayarivecha, that God afflicted you and God let you go hungry, or at least that's what you complained about. Vayachilcha es haman, and then God fed you with manna from heaven. Asher lo yadata, you had no clue what that was. This was not something familiar to your parents, to your predecessors, who knew of manna from heaven. It was a miracle that lasted just those 40 years in the desert. That's it. Says Moshe to the Jews. You know why God did that? To remind you that it's not by bread alone that man lives, but rather by what comes forth from the mouth of God. Saw recently an ad for a beef sandwich. It says, not by bread alone does man live. You need the beef. But what's the message Moshe was trying to convey? When we eat food, do you recognize right away when you look at the food that it's from God? Do you? When you look at food, it looks like the food is what sustains me. It looks like the food, I paid for that food. The food that I like. So, it requires that concentration. That's saying a bracha first to remind me that it's only thanks to God that the food is capable of sustaining me. And it's only thanks to God that the weather, that there was rain for the foods to grow and to develop. And you think about the abundance of food that we even have today. So you have to concentrate and think. On the other hand, on the flip side, manna was a clear testament that our life is sustained by God. The manna fell from heaven every day. It was a miracle. And one of the reasons I explained it in a shir several months ago when we talked about manna from heaven, why it was every day, and if you took extra, it would go front, it would go to waste. It was, you put it in your fridge to preserve it, it just didn't work. Obviously no fridges in those days, but the point was a reminder every single day that we depend on God for our sustenance. So for those 40 years in the desert, every day they had a reminder of where their blessings come from. And one of the commentaries tell us that, what does it mean we don't live by bread alone? Says the Ibn Ezra, that it's only with the life force that is derived from God. So he's telling us, don't just depend on your physical sustenance for your food. Realize it's the way of life. our Torah, our commitment, our dependence on God. Our physical body draws sustenance, yes, of course, from the nutrients in our food. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, what sustains us is not the food, it's God Almighty. How many people who live healthy lifestyles are, what? So we realize it's God who sustains us. Yes, there's a physical element to the bread, no doubt, but there's also the spiritual. What's the story in the Gemara? I gotta remember. The story of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, when his daughter brought vinegar instead of oil. Remember that story? I forget which tractate the story is in, but she bought vinegar. They were very poor. And she said, what am I going to light the Shabbos candles with? Vinegar doesn't work. So what did Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa say? He who commanded oil to burn, he will command vinegar to burn. And so it was. God decides that bread will be the vehicle for nutrition. So bread is the vehicle for nutrition. But it's God's word that sustains us. It's not the bread itself. So when manna fell from heaven every day, it was clear every single day to them that their sustenance was a gift from God. They realized exactly that. You know the story, two beggars going door to door. And this guy gives them a loaf of bread. He says, here, go eat something. So now they're going inside to eat their bread. One beggar, he's about to dig into this feast of bread. The other guy he thought it was a shtickle philosopher. He says, not so fast. Let's contemplate the loaf that we have before us. It's not just one loaf, but it's two. One is the physical, corporeal loaf of bread, right, that you're holding in your hands. And the other, he says to his friend, is a spiritual loaf. That which gives us our sustenance, which satiates our spirit. He was a philosopher. The other guy, whatever, you go ahead and muse. I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. It's time for me to eat my bread. So as the second beggar closed his eyes in his deep meditation, his contemplation about the bread, what happens? He's meditating. He wakes up and he's hungry. So he looks around for his half of the bread, but that's it. There's nothing left, just a few crumbs. So he turns to his friend. He says, "Hey, you ate my half of the bread." The guy said, "I did no such thing. You yourself told me that there were two loaves of bread, the physical and the spiritual." So he says, "I ate the physical one, and I left the spiritual one for you." What's the Medrash telling us? What are we learning from all this? That we don't live by bread alone. What was the significance of the manna? Man fell from heaven. So our sages teach us that there was another unique quality to the man that set it apart from all food. What was it? Let's look at the verse. Somewhere in Shemais, where is it? It says that God said to Moshe, I am raining down for you bread from heaven. And the people should go outside and they should collect it. So the man is described as falling from heaven. Okay? So we see that it's called bread. Bread from heaven. The Gemara talks about this. And the Gemara in Tractate Yuma says, Tana Rabbana, why is the Torah describe it as this heavenly bread? In another place it's called bread of the mighty. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva explained that the bread, that this is the bread that the ministering angels eat. Rabbi Yishmael says, he says, Akiva, you erred. Did the ministering angels eat bread? Don't we know that angels don't eat food? Don't we know that when Moshe went to heaven, he says, I didn't eat, water I didn't drink. So if even a man who goes on high can't eat bread, all the more so the angels who aren't human. So therefore, Rabbi Yishmael, another great Talmudic sage, he says that bread was absorbed into all 248 limbs, because the word is lechem abirim, the mighty bread. He says that there was no waste, like you could see on the screen. No waste. And what's going on here? Is the Talmud just using figurative, hyperbolic language, making up some kind of miracles? Again, if it's mentioned in the Talmud is not a book of fairy tales. Why would the Talmud mention this? Why is it important for us to know that there was no waste? Why? So the truth is, if you think about it, digestion is both an everyday occurrence. It's an amazingly complex process that we experience every time we eat. Think about this. When we eat, our digestive system extracts all the nutrients from the food, and that sustains us, that keeps us alive, it keeps us animated, going throughout the day. These nutrients are then distributed throughout the body, and each individual cell receives exactly the nutrients that it needs. The parts of the food that are useless to the body cells, what happens to those? Expelled, gone, right? So there are two processes that are happening simultaneously when we eat. Our bodies are getting the energy from the nutrients of the food that we're eating, and then everything else, what's happening to the rest of it? Waste goes out of the body. And that's how our very complex human bodies work. So, understanding the whole digestive system, I'm not going to give a biology class here, but we understand that it's complex, it's beautiful, it's amazing. Every time we go out of the bathroom, we say the bracha Mashiach, how God created us in this most amazing and complex way. So we think about the food. Food consists of nutrients that we benefit from and waste. And digestion is the process in which the body separates those two. The difference between food and manna is that manna from heaven had no waste. And therefore there was no need for people to use the bathroom during that time. There was no waste. The only question I wonder about is, it does talk about when you go out to war, and I guess because they ate literal food as well. The point is, there is an interesting, I saw one somewhere that Native Americans, that they used to use every part of the bison. There was no waste. I don't know. I once had bison, kosher bison, it was good. I'm not sure exactly how they did that. But the idea that we're saying here is, how Chassidus explains this, that there is a spiritual element in this process. And let me just share with you two thoughts about which, how Chassidus discusses the reason why food contains both aspects, the nutrients and the waste. What for? Why did God make our complex system in this way? I'm not going to read you the whole thing. It's in the Likutei Torah from the Alter Rebbe. But in a nutshell, the Alter Rebbe explains that when we eat food, we're constantly raising the sparks of godliness in that food to their source. So it's a Kabbalistic idea. You may recall the concept, the idea of klipas noga. There's different elements in the world. Klipas noga literally is the literal translation is a klipa, shell, that noga, that could shine. But we usually refer to something that's just neutral. Right? It's a benign type of element. And what we do with it is what's going to give it its potential. So you look at any shell, any peel, any husk, within it is the potential for you to reveal the fruit that's inside, right? You could see the fruit or the nut that's in it. So it's up to you what you're going to do with it. That's the concept that Kabbalah explains, and Chassidus expands upon, of Klipa. Our task, our job, is to uplift every element of the world, to align it with its godly purpose. So when you reveal that fruit that's behind the shell, behind the peel, we can use it for a good purpose. We don't know right now, will it be used for good or not? Is the fruit good or isn't it? But this plays out in every aspect of life. When we talk about kalipa, we're talking about this concept, this idea of everything having a potential in it for good. So the purpose of eating food is that we take the neutral element of this world and we uplift it to a higher level. We use it for a higher purpose. We discussed many times, what do I do with the energy of that food that I consumed? Did I make a bracha and thereby already elevate it? That's up to us what we're going to do with everything we have. When we say a blessing, we are thereby uplifting the food. When we use its energy that we gain from the nutrients in it to fulfill our purpose, to do good for others, to study Torah, to make a difference in this world, we are thereby elevating it to our purpose. It's up to me what my encounter with the food is going to be. Because food could have a good, positive effect on us. It could also have a negative, deleterious effect on a person. If I become drawn to food and I'm obsessed with it and it makes me unhealthy, what have I done to myself? Am I just indulging in tivus, in the pleasures of this world? So we have to think about when we eat food. That's all physical food. Of course, when it came to manna, which was spiritual food, came from heaven, there was no waste. I could waste my food even without wasting it. If I use the energy in the wrong way, what have I done with it? But with manna from heaven, there was no such thing as wasting it, because it was a spiritual food. There was no evil element in it. There was nothing a negative in the manna that needed to be expelled. There was no waste. And think about when it happened. We were traveling through the desert. So in a sense, they hadn't yet really taken on their role of refining the world at that point. They were still in the desert. They were basking in spirituality day and night. Only once they came to the land of Israel and had to engage in the physical world, as we discussed in a different shiur on the Parsha of Shlach, why they didn't want to go into Israel, as some of the messengers said, rather let's stay in the desert. So after all is said and done, at the end of the day, in what way am I uplifting food when I eat it? Am I just using the food for self-preservation so I could exist? Is that what I'm doing with it? How am I refining the food? That's my question. How do we uplift the food? So the beautiful talk that the Rebbe gave in 1991, 30 years ago, on this week's Parsha, he talks about this. And he tells us the Hasidic approach, the Rebbe's advice on how we can uplift physical matter by using it to fulfill a mitzvah. Let me read it to you in his words and translate along the way. He says, Tachlis Brias Ha'olam, the ultimate purpose of the world's existence, of why God created this world. V'yiridas haneshama beguf, and for the physical body, for the soul to enclose itself in a physical body in this world. He says is to fulfill the purpose of this Ava Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisparech Dira Batachtanim, that God wanted a dwelling in this world, and so that we could fulfill our divine mission and purpose here by refining the world around us, by utilizing our body for a holy divine purpose. How? When we do mitzvahs, when we study Torah, we take physical objects in this world. We take something physical and we use it for a spiritual, godly purpose. And through this, we're taking the physical world and we are thereby uplifting it to the spiritual. We're taking something that could be used for negative and using it for something positive. So, if we want to uplift elements of this world, we have to use it for a divine purpose. Food can be used as energy to do good, to perform mitzvahs, to help another human being. Food can only be uplifted if the energy that it produces fuels that productive life. When we eat food, when we use the energy to make the world a better, more godly place, then the food is considered to be uplifted and refined. If we squandered our life, if we wasted that opportunity, then of course we haven't uplifted anything. That's up to us. That's why I said before, the idea of kalipa is the potential within it is there. Question is, what do you do with that potential? And so the Talmud tells us the ramifications of a person who doesn't make a bracha when they eat. When we eat food, excuse me, but no bracha. Says the Gemara in Tractate Brachas, Kol hanene min ha'olam, whoever derives pleasure from this world without a bracha. Says the Gemara, Mo'al, they have misappropriated that food, its purpose. Everything in this world belongs to God, Rashi tells us. God created it. So the Talmud is telling us nothing in this world is free for us to just enjoy, to benefit from. We can only use it if we make a blessing, a bracha, before we eat it. If we are cognizant, if we are aware that it comes from God, and we remember that we're giving it its divine purpose. We're not just wasting. We're not just squandering an opportunity. There was a great uncle of mine who said that the first thing he learned when he joined the Hasidic school is, what's forbidden is forbidden. What's permitted, we don't always have to indulge just because it's there. It's called namala taiva. It's a Hasidic expression of just indulging in the physical pleasures of this world. So yes, when we eat and drink, we need it to sustain our lives, our existence. But am I using it to uplift myself and the world around me? Is it just excuse me, what am I doing with it? So yes, we could think back of the manna that the Jews got in the desert. I'm not in the desert. Maybe I got my own desert-like life sometimes. But the act of me eating, the culinary experience of my gastronomic delights on every day, it's a mitzvah to eat. I have to eat to sustain myself, to exist. And there are times when the transformation takes place automatically, like the manna from heaven, when automatically I say the bracha, I'm right away engaged in a mitzvah. You think about, actually, a good example would be Shabbos and Yom Tov. The food that we eat on these special days, even if I don't have a spiritual purpose in mind, the fact that I'm eating, it's a mitzvah to eat, to indulge in food on Shabbos. Oneg Shabbos. This week is the Shabbos Project. Talk about this idea of get extra special, enjoyable food in honor of Shabbos. On that note, by the way, a side note, this weekend, this Shabbos, is my wife's 40th birthday. So I would like to invite all ladies to please come join us Friday evening before Shabbos begins. 6 o'clock to light Shabbos candles. And join us. Light your Shabbos candles. If you're elsewhere, celebrate with us wherever you are and light your Shabbos candles. Eating food is part of the mitzvah of enjoying Shabbos. So you don't even have to do anything special there. Just eat the food. Of course, say your bracha, make your kiddush before. Now, you know what I say? Just tell us about eating food on Shabbos, that it's actually a foretaste of the future when Mashiach will come. We say every Shabbos, Mizmar Shir L'Yom Shabbos, song of the day for Shabbos. Say, just tell us, it's not talking about the day of Shabbos but the day Yom Shekula Shabbos. Shabbos today is a foretaste of the era that will be an eternal Shabbos, when all negativity, all evil, all sickness, all COVID will be eradicated, eliminated from this world. And so then when the world will be long-term Shabbos, when Mashiach comes, there won't be any need to uplift anything. So with that in mind, now that we understand this idea of the manna, the holy food, versus our regular food, and why our food has a whole digestive system involved, the idea that why man produced no waste, the deeper dimension is this about our purpose in this world, that we're here in the world to sublimate our surroundings. And one of the ways doing that is when we use our food for a higher, holier purpose. Because all the food has within it the mixture of good and bad. So when we consume it and use it for the right reason, we are extracting the good and leaving behind the waste. This is the deeper dimension of the reality of food waste, why it exists. The man that was from heaven was completely spiritual, so there was no waste, even in its physical manifestation. Now, of course, like we said, we don't have manna today, but there are contemporary instances of consuming food in that manna-like perspective, and that's enjoying the food of Shabbos, even though still go to the bathroom, even on Shabbos, because even if there's no waste, spiritually speaking, make sure you still take care of your bodily needs. But the point I'm saying is the act of eating itself is holy on these days. What I'd like to do in our remaining time is to understand the angels at Abraham's tent, which we started this year off with, and understand the debate that I mentioned between between the angels and Moshe Rabbeinu when he goes up high and he goes to heaven to get the Torah. So let me pull up that Gemara, a very famous Talmudic story. Let me pull that up again. Let's find it just a second. And the Gemara tells us that Mashiach Sha'ala Moshe Lamar, when Moshe Rabbeinu went up on high, the heavenly angels said before Hashem, what is this Mayulad Ish Beninu? What is this Homo sapien doing here amongst us, angelic beings? And God tells them he came to receive the Torah. So the angels protested. They said, this Chemda, this hidden treasure that was concealed all these years, you're going to give it away to these sinners of flesh and blood? And God tells Moshe, be a good Jewish lawyer, you answer. And Moshe says to them, he says, Rebbeinu Shalom, the master of the world, the Torah that you're giving me, what's written in it? It's written to believe in one God. Do angels have even thoughts of polytheism? Of worshiping idols? It says, well, look at the very first commandment. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of bondage in the land of Egypt. Did you guys, angels, did you descend to Egypt? Were you slaves to Pharaoh? Why should the Torah be yours? And he goes through all the commandments. Don't worship idols. Do you guys ever have a concern of idolatry? Remember the day of Shabbos and keep it holy. What work do you guys do that you need to, this instruction of keeping Shabbos? And he goes through all of those. Don't murder, don't steal, honor your father and mother. If you have no father or mother, right. How is this even relevant to any of you? The angels were of the opinion that the Torah is a spiritual entity and it belongs in heaven. Moshe's viewpoint was the Torah is meant to be given to man, to physical human beings, to us who are imperfect, who make mistakes, so that we can uplift the world around us. The Torah being our divine manuscript, our instruction manual for life. Moshe says only a human being in this world is able to transform the physical mundane, the food that we eat, and everything else around us, and to uplift it, to elevate it. A human being in this world, as low as we might get, as terrible, as frail as we might be. But because we are so low in this physical world, that's why we have the opportunity. You guys are in heaven, you're angels. Of course, you don't succumb to sin. That's not your nature. And now we could go back and understand the meal, the debate that Moshe is having with them, that he refers them back to the meal that they had with the angels, that Avram serves them food, literal food. What was so special about the meal? You remember the menu? Let's go back to that. We'll go back to, the truth is I don't even want to discuss the menu today. We can get back to the menu in a second. Was it a cheeseburger that they were eating? Meat and milk? But there's another angle that I want to take this from, because I already discussed that one last year, the milk and meat aspects. I don't want to repeat last year's share. You can find it somewhere on YouTube. But this year I want to look at it from another angle. God was reminding the angels that they partook of Avram's meal. And they experienced the transformation of physical food into spiritual energy, which is what we do. God was telling the angels, and all of creation, of course, that the ultimate purpose of all of creation, angels included, is for Abraham and Moshe and all of us as physical human beings, that we can transform the physical into spiritual. And this can only be done by souls that are in bodies. And when the angels understood this, they had no choice but to let the Torah go into this world to fulfill its purpose. And at the same time, if this is a task that only human was capable of, then why did Avram give the angels to eat if they're not humans? And so, another point, Avram stood over him, then the verse says. What does it mean that Avram stood over them? That they entered his turf. They were here in the physical world. Avram lived in a world, not just the physical. Avram lived ahead already in the next world, in the era of Mashiach, the end game. That's where Avram lived. Avram was giving them a taste of the future, of the Messianic era, when the whole world is refined. So he showed them the end game, when the entire world will be transformed through our efforts today. So now, my friends, hopefully we have a fresh approach toward gastronomy, towards food, towards eating. We understand the power within the food, and hopefully we can do something about it each time we eat. Think about what can you do to take this message home. And I think the most direct and simple way is if we can be a little bit more cognizant of the food we eat. Let's make that bracha on the food before we eat it. Let's take care to have the proper intention, the right kavana when we make that bracha. And then let's use the energy of that food that we consume for the right purposes, to do good, to make the world a better place. You know, a very famous teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, he said that when our ancestors ate the manna, the heavenly bread, they felt that they were sustained by godliness in the bread and not from the physical material loaf of bread. And this taught them, says the Baal Shem Tov, to understand the same thing is true with the bread that comes from the ground. It's not the material loaf of bread, of the physical food, that's giving us our life, but rather realizing it's the word of God. It is the energy, the divine energy. And so when we do the mitzvah, we are living that divine energy in our lives. So my friends, we could say the brachas before we eat and be more cognizant and aware of our divine purpose in our world. We could hopefully be more dedicated and committed to our purpose. Reminded of a story I'll conclude with, because I was talking this morning with a friend of ours who's the great-grandchild of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, the Kotzker Rebbe. And he told me a story that once his great-grandfather was sitting in a deep meditation, and all of a sudden had this bout of coughing. He started coughing. I think that's why he told me the story, because I was coughing earlier. So his son quickly came in and brought him a nice cup of steaming hot tea. So his father waved his hand. Reb Mendel, he said, in the high supernal worlds, there's no tea. So the son said, you're right. But in the high supernal worlds, there's also no coughing. And the father smiled and drank the cup of tea. He recognized that tea is given to help us overcome our cough, and with that, to uplift us and uplift the tea. So my friends, that I think is the message to each of us. Moshe Rabbeinu won the case. He got the Torah here. Why? Because the Torah is relevant to all of us. The Torah is what helps us uplift the world around us. So when we say our brachas, and when we utilize the food we eat for a higher divine purpose to make a difference in the world around us, do good with the energy, and then go to the gym and exercise, and do even more good because you're stronger and healthier. Now you achieved your purpose of why you eat the food, because you've elevated it, you've refined it, and you yourself are refined thereby by it too. Any questions?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
if the food, the man, was spiritual,
Yeah.
was there a bracha to say before they ate it?
You know, I think there was still a bracha. I don't remember what it was, but there was a bracha, I believe. Because even for the spiritual, we make a bracha every time we do a mitzvah, right? That God commanded us and God gave us an opportunity to do a mitzvah. So even though it was spiritual and there was no waste in the manna, I think they still had a certain bracha they had to say. I think the bracha was, my daughter reminded me the other day, Hamaitzi lechem min hashamayim. God brings bread from the heaven. We say Hamaitzi lechem min haaretz, so God gives us bread from the earth. They said Hamaitzi lechem min hashamayim, from the heaven.
Rabbi, it's Ezra here.
Yes, Ezra, how are you feeling? You're looking good.
Rabbi, I owe you something. I will call you. But thank you so much. Those words were they had such high impact. I did not.
God bless you.
I went through. I just followed those words that you sent it to me, and then with simple, very simple way, but very powerful. There's such an impact. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you. All right. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Yes. I got a question. It's not a question. It's just a clarification.
Yeah.
Yes. When